This is section 5.5 on side, 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 and side angle side. We're going to be using this term a lot in this section. An included angle is just the angle that's in between two sides. That's all that means. So for example, angle A is the included angle of segment AC and segment AB. Do you agree that angle A is in between those two sides? That's the included angle. Now, having a picture helps, but you don't need it. How do you know that angle A is in between these two sides? Notice how they both have an A. So if you come down here and look at these two sides, the included angle would be angle B. The included angle here is angle C. We need to understand that term if we're going to understand our next shortcut. Postulate 5.2 is the side angle side postulate. Remember, the S means a pair of congruent sides. Another S means a second pair of congruent sides. But notice how there's an A in between. That A stands for a pair of congruent angles. And notice that those congruent angles live in between the congruent sides. That's not an accident. It's the included angle that's congruent. So you have two sides in the included angle of one triangle congruent to the corresponding sides in the included angle of another triangle. When that happens, when you see this type of markings on your picture, that means those triangles are congruent. So if you see the diagram, it's really easy to see we got two pairs of congruent sides and we have congruent angles in between. Sometimes, though, they don't give you the picture. Maybe they just give you these statements. Well, this is definitely a pair of congruent sides, and this is a pair of congruent sides. Notice how these are congruent angles, and it doesn't matter that they list it third. Where are these congruent angles? Are they included? Angle G, isn't it in between these two segments? How about angle L? Is it included between these two segments? They are. That's how you know it's the included angle. It has nothing to do with the order that it's listed. So we're going to try some examples using these diagrams. They're going to give you some given information, determine whether the two triangles are congruent by side angle side. So we'll start by making the marks. Segment AB, that's congruent to segment DE. That's one pair of congruent sides. Then they tell you that segment AC is congruent to segment DF. That's another pair of congruent sides. And notice how I use two slash marks because these don't have to be the same length as those. So it's just another way of showing that these are congruent, but maybe not the same as these ones. Last thing, angle B is congruent to angle E. You have the parts that you need to use side angle side. The only problem is those congruent angles, they're not in between the congruent sides. So you have your two pairs of congruent sides, but your pair of congruent angles is not in between. Notice what that spells. Angle side side. There is no AS postulate. If you have those pairs of congruent parts, those two triangles could be different sizes and shapes. That's why the congruent angles need to be in between. So it's not AS. I'm going to take a second and erase these marks. At least I'm trying to. Okay. Not sure what's going on. There we go. How about I just erase everything? How's that sound? There we go. We're going to look at number 5. They're telling you that segment AB is congruent to segment DE. So I'm going to make those marks. Also, segment EF is congruent to segment BC. We got two pairs of congruent sides. Then they tell you angle B is congruent to angle E. Now, if you know these three pairs of congruent parts, are the triangles congruent? You do have congruent included angles. This is side angle side. Did you see the difference between this and the AS postulate that we had number 4? We need the congruent angles to be in between the S's. Okay, I'm just going to erase everything on the slide again just to make it easier. Here's some other information, and we're going to try to attempt to figure this one out without making the marks. Maybe we'll go back and make them. This is a pair of congruent sides, and this is a pair of congruent sides. Here's a pair of congruent angles. So, is it AS or is it side angle side? Do you know the difference just by looking at the congruent statements? Well, look at angle C. Isn't it included between those two segments? Look at angle D. Is it included between those two statements? It is. That's why it's this guy. So these two triangles are congruent because this shows that the triangles are congruent by the shortcut. This one doesn't. This does not prove the triangles are congruent. If you weren't sure, just by looking, you could have done this. Segment BC is congruent to segment ED. Angle C is congruent to angle D. Segment CA is congruent to segment DF. That's side angle side. Your congruent angles are included.